I'm Nathaniel Lee,
I'm Isaiah Johnson.
and this is our Laravel project. Let's go ahead and register a user. Register. Log in with that user. And this brings us to the profile page where we can add a job. And it adds our job into the database, and we can go ahead and add an education. And our education's been added. Then we can go ahead and go to the Manage Users page. We can suspend that user. And then if we try and log in with that user again, the login will fail. And we can go ahead and restore the user. And our information is still all there. We can go ahead and remove the user.
Of course.
It's a little error that appears sometimes, but if we go ahead and refresh the page, that user is now gone. And did you want to go ahead and talk about that?
Yeah. So first thing is we used jQuery data tables. So if we go down right here, we instantiate a data table. The column defs tells you that we are centering all the text. And then where we see targets -1, that's telling you based on these, if the user is suspended or not, it'll render a different button. So one of them will be a restore button, the other will be a suspend button. And then we're taking the data that was returned to us from the retrieve users URL, and then we're going to go ahead and populate the data table with the values. And then the last thing is where we check their suspension, it returns a 0 or a 1, where it says render function data, return data equals 0, 0 either active or suspended. That will just change the number to active or suspended. So go ahead and I guess we'll go to the admin controller. So jQuery is calling the retrieve all users function when it's trying to instantiate the data table. And then in turn that's going to call the user business services retrieve all users. And then that's going to call the right here you can see it calls the data access object find all method. And then the find all method is right there. So what it's doing is it's doing an inner join on the user and the credential so that you can get the user's email and whether or not they're suspended. And then we're creating a user model based on that for every row that gets returned. We create a user and we stack that onto an array, and then we return the array back to the business service. And then that will return back to the controller. And then in the controller, we convert that to JSON. Right there, you JSON encode that array that was passed back, and then that's what the data table uses for instantiating.
And then
remove user, remove user. It will take, so what's passed from the AJAX function is the ID of the table row, and each table row is set to the ID of the user. And then that's just going to call the delete by ID method in the business service. And then that's going to call the delete user. So you pass the ID to the delete user in the data access object, and that's just going to call a delete statement. It'll delete the user from the credential table and the user table. And after we do that in the AJAX function, you don't have to show this, but in the AJAX, on a success, it'll refresh the data table so that the page doesn't have to refresh. And then, right there, refresh data table. All that function does is it'll delete the data table, basically reinitialize it. We couldn't find another way to do it without destroying it first. And then the suspend button, just real fast, we'll do the suspend button. If you go to the admin controller. So it's another AJAX function, and it calls the toggle user suspension method. Same thing, it'll pass the ID, except the business service is calling toggle user suspension. And that's going to call in the DAO, the toggle user suspension. And in that statement, you can see it says update credential set suspended equals. Basically what that's doing is it's toggling it between 0 and 1. So if it's 0, it'll go to 1 if it's 1. And then it's setting that to whatever. It'll look for the foreign key in the credentials, and then if that matches the user ID, then it'll go ahead and change that value. So that's pretty much it for the managed users. The only other thing to note is obviously it'll prompt the user for a confirmation if they actually want to remove or delete or remove or suspend so that they don't accidentally do it.
Alright, so we'll go ahead and go over the job controller. The job education and address layers are all the same, so we'll just go over one. So the add job takes in the different pieces of a job, so the name, description, start, end, and the user ID, passes them all to the job business service, which will then call the data service to create a job, and that simply uses an insert statement to put it into the database and then returns a count of the affected rows. So I'll have a method that displays the jobs for a given user ID. So similar to the different things that Isaiah was showing, it takes any user ID and then passes that eventually down to the DAO, which will pull all the jobs based on that user ID. The update job, we don't have a front end for yet, but it would allow the user to update a previously held job or entry. And then there's also the ability to delete a job, which would just remove the job from the database. And that's our project.